This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to P. Sirico, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, to Ignacio, who just increased his pledge amount, and to Craig Fenstermaker, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. Alright, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 594 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing Season 2 of the Disney Plus series Andor, a prequel to the 2016 film Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. We previously discussed Season 1 back in episode 533, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And this will include spoilers for everything in the show, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 42nd appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, and she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Great to be back, Dave.
The next up, we've got Erin Lindsey, making her 39th appearance on the show. She's the author of the Bloodbound series of epic fantasy novels, and the Rose Gallagher series of paranormal historical mystery novels. Her latest Rose Gallagher book, Pearls and Poison, will be out in October. So, Erin, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's nice to be back.
And also joining us today is Matt London, making his 19th appearance on the show. He's the author of the Eighth Continent novels, a series of science fiction eco-adventures, and the interactive novel You Are the Classics, Treasure Island. His short fiction appears in The Living Dead 2, Daily Science Fiction, and Space and Time. So, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. How is it only 19 appearances? Surely it's in the 20s.
Meanwhile, Andrea and I are in a dead heat. I'm going to catch you.
It's on.
Andrea has 42, which is, of course, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So
Of course it is.
She can never go on the show again.
My life would be the poorer for it.
Okay, and so it's actually been 2.5 years since the 4 of us were gathered to discuss Season 1 of Andor. And so a lot has changed in the last 2.5 years. And at least I have the sense that Star Wars has been floundering a little bit. I haven't followed this super closely, but I thought Matt might know more about this. But kind of, Matt, what is your impression of kind of how things are going overall in Star Wars world?
For the franchise?
For the franchise, yeah.
I mean, Star Wars is as popular as ever. It's loved by billions. There have been some shows that I think the Disney Corporation has had high hopes for that have not been renewed. But whether that's an indication of the quality of those shows or luck or its place in the, entertainment ecosystem, hard to say.
Because, I mean, since the last time we talked, there was an Ahsoka show and there was one called The Acolyte. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of burned after the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan, so I haven't watched those. Yeah. I'm only going to watch them if I hear, somebody I trust give a really strong recommendation, and that hasn't happened. But
yeah, and there's Skeleton Crew also, and some animated series. There's been a lot.
I did watch Acolyte, and I had some criticism, but overall I enjoyed it. And I was somewhat disappointed that it wasn't renewed. But that's my only other contact with Star Wars at this point, aside from Andor.
How about Erin? Have you followed any of the Star Wars shows?
No, to be honest, I don't know if it's an unpopular opinion. I bailed after after the Book of Boba Fett. I watched a few episodes of that and I didn't like it at all. I wasn't super stoked about the last season of The Mandalorian, and I just kind of I didn't hear things that inspired me to check out any of the others. So I just bailed and waited for Andor to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly at least have the impression that a lot of the shows have kind of not done that great. And I think the reason I want to mention it is because my understanding is that season 2 of Andor was very touch and go, whether it was going to get funded at all, and that there were some very serious creative choices that were constrained by financial considerations. So I mean,
and I think the stitching shows.
Yes,
not to jump the gun, but
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is that basically this was planned out as a 5-season story, and just after like all the strikes and all sorts of delays and things, that the showrunner Tony Gilroy was like, you know, we can't do 5 seasons. Like Disney's not gonna, you know, finance them all. Like, you know, I've already spent 10 years of my life telling this story, going back to Rogue One and everything. Like, you know, we have to wrap it up at some point. So they basically took, and then of course this is a prequel, so like as the actors age, it gets more and more of a problem that they look older in the prequel than they do in Rogue One. And so the decision was made at some point, okay, the only way we're going to be able to do this is basically take the story we had planned for the next 4 seasons and compress it into 1 season and kind of do 4 batches of 3 episodes, each covering what would have been a different season. So every 3 episodes, this show jumps forward a year in time, and we get a kind of like mini series covering the key events of that year. But so I don't know, did people know all that going in, or like had you been paying attention to that? Or
I didn't.
I didn't, but I have to say I came to that conclusion fairly quickly through the watching.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess I'll say, so when we got the first story, when it started out, kind of how did people respond to that? So let's start off with Andrea, kind of initial impressions of season 2.
Overall, or episodes 1, 2, and 3?
Just, yeah, when you started watching the show, kind of what were your initial reactions?
Okay, let's see. I loved it. I still think it's the highest quality, but those first 3 episodes, I thought they spent too much time with the incompetent rebel bros. But it was still entertaining in a entertaining kind of way. But you know, the story was still there, and I think it ends well in episode 3. And you know, the highlight of it is, of course, Cyril and Dedra's insanely bougie lifestyle, creepy relationship. I was living for that.
They're so gross.
Oh, so awful and creepy, and I love it. Love it.
Well,
love
yes.
it.
So what I saw an interview with Tony Gilroy where he basically said, people complained that season 1 started out too slow, so he decided this season to start things off with a bang, where you have Cassian stealing a like experimental TIE fighter from an Imperial base, and then getting like ending up getting captured by some sort of rebel faction, and having to escape. And yeah, I wasn't too sold on that.
I mean, it was. Go ahead, Erin. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it brought back a lot of. It touched on a nerve for me with the Star Wars stuff of being a little too jokey. However, it was still entertaining, and it wasn't full of jokes. It was just humorous, but it was just a little too much humor for me, and especially since it was stretched out over 2 episodes.
Yeah,
that's personally my feeling on it.
I think, for me personally, I didn't find it too campy, so I was okay with the tone. The first thing I want to say is never listen to your reviews. The second thing I want to say
is, except us, listen to us, but don't listen to any other reviews.
Obviously, because we're professionals. But I think it's a curious storytelling choice when you've already got very compressed storylines that we as viewers are invested in from the previous season, that you sacrifice so much airtime to what essentially feels like a video game side quest. That's one piece. I mean, I think what I did like about it is that it showcased one of the things that I like about Rogue One and about Andor overall, especially Andor, is that they showcase the heterogeneity of rebel movements and the fact that rarely are they actually a cohesive group with a shared set of values and a shared understanding of how you execute a rebellion. That just doesn't match with reality. And I said in our review of the previous season, it's very clear that the writers here have a strong background of reading history and understanding how rebel movements actually work. And so I appreciated that this little window showed us that you had this difference, and that some of these much vaunted heroic rebels are in fact just twits. And that they are also part of the cast of rebels. And you have to live with that. And you can't pick and choose which parts of the rebellion you're associated with all the time. And so I liked that about it. I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity because we had that snippet of, and not to jump ahead, but there's a snippet of Dedra talking about how you want an insurgency who can count on to be boobs. And I thought, well, here are the boobs in question. But it turned out that no. Thing. Yeah, they were irrelevant. And so I felt like that was almost a missed opportunity there.
But I think they picked it up, sorry, again, jumping ahead, with the Gorman stuff, who do exactly what she thinks they're going to do.
Yeah, but I was even a little confused who are these people who have captured him? And it's a couple scenes before we get a very, and there's still so many he's supposed to meet Porco, and then somebody's brother left them behind, and they're arguing. It's like, I felt like that could have been a lot clearer right off the bat.
Yes.
But I want to get Matt back in here too. So Matt, kind of what were your initial impressions going into season 2?
Well, I mean, my initial impression was like, oh, Andor's back. Like, I was very excited that it felt kind of slow paced and had thought in what was happening. I really liked that opening sequence. The conversation he has with the double agent, I thought was really compelling. And I actually really liked kind of the bumbling nature of it. Like, it felt very Han Solo, where so much of like Star Wars action in the original trilogy is just a series of people screwing up and then needing to fix what they did that they just screwed up. There's like so much entertainment in that. And I felt like a lot of him, crashing into the walls of the hangar and trying to escape and fighting off these ties. All of that felt very much like a Star Wars action sequence to me. And I was there for it, right? That combination of this very cerebral, very political commentary combined with the Star Wars aesthetic, both in terms of like set dressing and plot. The rebels in the jungle, to me, one thing I'll say is that at a high level, I think that Tony Gilroy is being much more explicit this season in his political commentary on the current moment.
Yes.
You can see that really prevalently with the farm workers on the planet where Bix and company are in the first 3 episodes, as a very clear statement about illegal immigration in the United States. And then the rebels in the jungle, to me, came across as a very explicit indictment of the liberal movement in the West, where these are people who are on the same side, have the same goal, have the tiniest little differences with each other, and they would rather murder each other than the bad guys. Like, that's how I interpret that entire sequence. And so it did go on, I think, longer than some of the other sequences that were, I think, supposed to be given equal weight later on in the season. To me, I felt like it was an important message for people to listen to.
I guess, I think it's, one of the things that science fiction can do is comment on the real world through this kind of like distorted funhouse mirror thing. And so I'm all there for that. But I felt like I think maybe Erin mentions already that there was we had so much invested in these characters and some of these stories that I felt like got shortchanged in this season, that I wasn't sure we should have been spending so much time on these characters who aren't that interesting, we haven't seen before, and who don't ultimately matter to the events of this season.
And also, I think, if I can say it, to me, he maybe didn't trust himself enough. Because, I did a full rewatch of season 1 shortly before starting season 2. And one of the questions I had was, is it the case that the messaging is much more explicit, or is it the case that it lands much more explicitly? The latter being more a function of the zeitgeist than the writing itself. And I think that the messaging in season 1, for those of us who knew what to look for a few years ago, landed every bit as explicitly. And I think he could have trusted himself to not be quite so, to maintain that level of subtlety and still get the message across, knowing that the audience is all the more primed now than we were collectively a few years ago to note the parallels of what democratic backsliding looks like in the modern world.
Well, I felt like the first season, because I also binged it right before I started season 2. I felt like the first season is like a warning. Second season is a mirror. That's kind of how I saw it.
I mean, I think one thing to notice, I forget the exact time frame, but he wrote all these scripts, I think, quite a while ago now, because I think it was before the writer's strike. The scripts were finalized, so that's why the show was able to kind of move forward at all. But he was kind of off, like he didn't touch it for like a year and a half or something, and he had passed off the scripts to the production team, and then they were working on it. But I mean, the scripts, my understanding is anyway, were written quite a while ago at this point. Well, I
don't know if there's anything new in the information that he's delivering, right? It's topical, but it's not like any of these things weren't true 5, 10, or 50 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's timeless in a sense. But I mean, I do think that, I like it when there's some, commentary, but not when it sort of distracts from, or when it interferes with my suspension of disbelief. And I felt like, to some extent, some of the stuff was just interfering with my suspension of disbelief, where, I mean, even like, so what happens basically is that there's this planet called Gorman, and the Empire is planning to strip mine it for some vital resource they need to build the Death Star. And this is going to completely, ecologically devastate the planet and render it basically uninhabitable. And so there's a resistance movement on this planet, and they don't know exactly what the Empire is doing, but they know nothing good is happening. But this society on Gorman is modeled like incredibly closely after like occupied France during World War II. And I was having a little trouble how like it didn't, there were certainly times where it didn't seem like Star Wars. It was so like mid 20th century Europe.
And you had a problem? You felt that took it away from the story?
Yeah. I mean, you could feel two ways about it, right? You could feel like, oh, this like these resonances, these thematic similarities deepen the emotional experience or whatever. Or you could feel like, this feels like it's not taking place in a galaxy far, far away. It feels like it's like just on Earth. And for me, it was.
Sorry, go ahead. I thought
for me, it was just a little too close to this feels like it's just happening on Earth. So like the cantina, the Mos Eisley Cantina, like it resembles an Earth bar, but it doesn't exactly resemble an Earth bar. Whereas in one of the prequel movies, there's like this like it's like a 1950s American diner, and I'm like, this is just breaking my suspension of disbelief. It should be more alien than this. And so I thought it should have been a little more alien. But go ahead, Erin.
I actually liked that choice. I liked it because it's entirely in keeping with the ethos. The whole empire aesthetic, imperial aesthetic, is based on Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Look at the outfits, look at the behavior, look at some of the language that they use, stormtroopers. I mean, this is very closely modeled on Nazi Germany. And so to me, it was entirely in keeping with that. that they would have the Gormans be French resistance. I'm fascinated by the language that they spoke, which as a French speaker sounded to me like a perfect blend of German and French.
Yes.
It was exactly German being spoken by French people.
Yes. I had the same exact, I'm obsessed with languages and made up languages. So I'm like, oh my God, that's German. No, but it's really French. And then I'm looking it up and they wrote it specifically for this. And it was supposed to be French coded and based on French phonetics. And I was like, this is amazing. I loved that part.
It was
that was
brilliant. It felt like living in Switzerland.
Yeah. and if you notice, like the architecture is very Art Nouveau. Like the cafe has all those Art Nouveau scrolls like they have in all the cafes in France. It was, I loved that choice too. I totally 100% love that.
Arches and mansard roofs and squares with cafes in them. I thought it was a great choice.
I agree with the language. And the way that the actors spoke the language was totally convincing. Like if I didn't know it was a made up language, I would have, it seems like it was a real language.
Yeah.
And I want to get Matt in here too. So Matt, what did you think of the Gorman setting?
I mean, I didn't have a problem with the aesthetic choices. Every Star Wars planet is like just one thing. So the French resistance planet kind of fit in with the depictions that we've seen elsewhere in the franchise. I thought that I mean, I don't want to focus on one little thing, but I think that the casting of these actors across Gorman were just really, really powerful. Like you said, being able to deliver these lines in a made-up language and have it sound so emotional and authentic. Yes. I mean, the bullpen on this show is so deep in terms of acting and casting.
Yeah.
But I thought all of these bit players felt really, really strong, and sort of enjoyed spending time with them. Sorry, go ahead. No.
Finish.
Good.
I was just going to say, I also, when I was looking up the whole language thing, apparently this was George Lucas's wish from the beginning that the rebels were the French resistance, because he is a World War II nerd. And he specifically wanted the rebels to be fashioned on the what the French resistance was. So this was just taking it one little step further, and I had no problem with that because it's aesthetically pleasing and aesthetically easy to understand. Not
Except
that I think
berets.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've seen interviews with him where he talks about him modeling the rebels after the Viet Cong, which is a pretty shocking thing to say. But it puts interesting context on people who think about, yes, the trappings of the Empire are very Nazi, but in the equation where the rebels are the Viet Cong, of course, the Empire is the Americans. So George was always a bit of a, incendiary person when he's not making aliens sing.
Well, I think what's cool about it, though, is that as far as the Andor franchise is concerned, you can see clear sort of echoes of various rebel movements in it. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I wasn't aware of, I don't think we discussed it anyway, unless I'm having a total memory fail from season 1, is that whole heist was modeled after a real world episode in the life of Stalin. So
I didn't know that.
Andor is actually modeled after a young Joseph Stalin, fun fact. So, drawing these threads from various rebel movements and none of whose hands are clean. None of them.
Yes. And that's the best part of it. And it's only specifically addressed in Andor and Rogue One where nobody's hands are clean. That's the first thing I loved about Rogue One, and what I loved about Andor is that nobody's an angel.
Yeah.
And some of their hands are very dirty indeed.
Yes.
And I don't want the point to get lost that, because I've started off with some, like complaining here, but I mean, this is still like by far the best Star Wars show.
Oh,
probably
100%.
The best Star Wars anything, just in terms of the quality of the writing and, the depth of the characterization and the intelligence of the themes and
just
so on.
And just to follow up on the Empire being modeled after Nazis, the whole conference, the secret conference about Gorman, where all the people were gathered, it reminded me immediately of the Wannsee conference. I think it's a conference where the heads of all the Nazi divisions got together to discuss the final solution. That's immediately the first thing I thought was secret head of every division, secret conference to talk about how we're going to enact the final solution. And I was like, I mean, once again, leaning right into history and like small parts of history that, unless, I don't know, maybe some people know about, maybe don't, but it's kind of like one of those, if you know, you know.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's lots of parallels that we could draw. We have somewhat limited time, so I want to move on to some other topics.
Can I just hop in really quick with something? So before we move, in terms of the writing, I was struck by a lot of sort of interesting structural choices in the screenwriting, and the way that they seed things and build your concern for activities that might happen or things that characters are doing. The one thing that really stood out to me in, I guess, like episodes 1, 2, 3 are Mon has this childhood friend who Luthen gets worried is going to screw them over. And they sort of like very quickly go through this process of deciding this guy's got to go, and they take him out sort of subtly off screen. Right. And to me, it just felt so classic Sopranos in terms of the structure, like very similar pattern to like a classic Sopranos episode where somebody's got to go and then they take care of it. And I found it very interesting for them to adopt that sort of structure on a Star Wars show. But I felt like there were a number of things like that throughout the season where I was seeing these patterns from other TV or other sort of narrative structures come in.
That's interesting, because that very storyline is the one that made me say, wait, something's wrong here. It not only, I mean, for a bunch of reasons, including who they cast in it, I wondered, is Rupert, what's his name? Rupert? Anyway, the actor who plays Tay Kolma, was he just not available? Was he too busy doing season 3 of The Diplomat? What was the issue here? Because we had invested there was a lot of runway for that storyline. And then he turns on a dime and suddenly he's evil and it's over. And that just felt so truncated to me and so hasty that it seemed like one of the threads that they had to cut short in order to get her done.
And we also never really get Mon Mothma's emotional reaction to that happening. Like she mentions later on, she's like, it haunts me or something. But like in the immediate aftermath of that, there's no.
But that's the end of that 3 episode.
I know,
stretch.
But this, like Erin's saying, I mean, I think that this should have, if this was longer, that's one of the things that we should have gotten, if there were more episodes.
The whole storyline about her daughter's wedding and all the anxiety and hand-wringing that went into season 1 about whether it should happen. And they're just like, and then it was fine. And we never mentioned it again.
Well, I mean, I feel like the conversation that she has with her daughter right before the ceremony is the end of the storyline, which is, I hate you, I've disowned you, and life's going to go on. It
feels like that's her cutting all ties, and that's why she can go off and be the rebel leader. Because the daughter's rejected her, the husband's a piece of shit. And I love that we got a resolution on the husband situation at the end.
It resolved the only way it was ever going to.
Yes, exactly.
but wait, so does everyone agree that there should have been more, like in an ideal world, driven only by creative decisions, there should have been 3 or 4 seasons at least of this show.
Absolutely.
I actually think it's the primary limitation in quality on the show was that decision. It reminds me of another show we've done a panel on, Arcane. Season 2 of Arcane, you could tell. So it was so obvious that they had much more story in mind. And in trying to do a little bit of all the storylines, it ended up being a bit of a mess. And it's such a shame because the quality was so high. This wasn't as dramatic, but I feel like it was the same type of vibe where you just are left frustrated that the storytellers weren't given the room that they deserved, that they had earned through the quality of season 1 to do justice to the story.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I'll bring up my biggest, my biggest example of that was that my favorite character in season 1 was Cyril Karn, and my 2 favorite characters were Cyril Karn and Dedra Miro. And I thought all the material in this season featuring them was good. But I wanted like at least twice as much. And in particular, even just the fact that Dedra is keeping Cyril in the dark, and there's this, big secret that might come out and that might affect their relationship, I thought needed to be emphasized way, way, way more than it was.
And Cyril needed to sit with his change of heart a lot longer than we got to.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he didn't get a chance to have the thing that changes his mind. That's the thing. To me, it didn't feel like there was a lot missing from that arc, but there was a little bit at the end, like one or two scenes that needed to happen to fully anchor, like, he's discovered something about these people, he's changed their mind about them, he's humanized them, and that justifies his surprise, and sense of betrayal.
Mm.
He needs room to decant his feels about the betrayal of his entire worldview.
Yeah. Because, I think that's what drove it mostly a good deal for him, is that he felt personally betrayed, not even so much by the Empire, but by Dedra, who didn't key him in. And I think that might have driven his change of heart for the the Gormans. I'm not sure, but I felt like for him, he is essentially a narcissist, and it's being kept out of the loop that sort of made him angry. You could argue that it's not true, but that's how I felt about it.
See, I had a different read on that. I mean, and it's like just not there because there's not enough scenes to say this definitively. Yes. But I because I rewatched all the Cyril Dedra scenes, and I felt like the story they were going for was that Dedra is a complete careerist, opportunist, and she thinks that Cyril is the same way, and she thinks that as long as she keeps throwing promotions his way, he doesn't care about anything else because she doesn't really care about anything else. And she has misjudged him, that he really does have at some level, an ethical core that gets disturbed by this, like this massacre is like too far for him to morally, look the other way. Mm-hmm. And so their whole relationship implodes under this misunderstanding of what she thought their nature was. So I could be wrong. That's sort of how it seemed to me.
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, which is why I think for that emotional punch to really land, we needed a little more time with it. He needed a little more time with it. Mm-hmm. I understand, of course, that that's not how real life works, and it's perfectly plausible that he doesn't have time to consider the implications of his actions before he meets an untimely end. But as viewers, it would just be a lot more satisfying. And it kind of links back to something I said about season 1, which is, what I was missing was the character who is in it because they truly believe in the ethos of Empire, that it is legitimately for the betterment of everyone. And I wouldn't go that far with Cyril, but he was the closest of any character who wasn't just going through the motions because he was bored and had no capacity for self-reflection. He wasn't just doing it purely for narcissistic, ambitious reasons, although that did play a big part. There was part of the enterprise that he was epistemologically invested in. And that part, that seeing that character come apart at the seams and realize that everything that he has believed is completely morally bankrupt, that's something I feel like would have been very satisfying to see.
Well, I think that's where the divide is that the second 3 episodes 4, 5, and 6 is the Gorman episode, and he's acting through all of that when he's meeting with the rebels, because he's immediately going back and reporting. And he doesn't seem to me, it's all an act. But we come back in episode 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's a year later, and suddenly he's going apologetic. They've found out what he is without off camera, and he's coming back apologetic to them. And there's that 1 year divide where stuff happens that we didn't see, which we don't go along on that journey with him. And that's what's missing.
But I even feel like even if they had 5 seasons, I don't know if I would want to go along with the decision to kill him halfway through the story. I feel like he was, like I said, my favorite character in the show. Why do you kill off, the most interesting character halfway through the story? So I don't know. I just, based on season 1, I was expecting a much more interesting storyline for that character.
It was very shocking when he dies. I actually exclaimed out loud, shall we say.
Yeah. I want to get Matt back in here too. So Matt, what did you think of the whole thing?
No, I mean, I just, maybe I am more forgiving than the rest of you. I felt like there was very little missing from this arc. I wasn't expecting or clamoring for more. I think one of the biggest maybe problems with Star Wars generally is that the Empire has too much drip. They're just so sexy and the costumes look slick and they're all really charming and they've got great accents. And like, these are the bad guys. We shouldn't think they're cool. We should think they suck, because they do suck. So, I wasn't too surprised that he got killed when he did. I think that had they had 5 seasons, I think they probably would have offed him in the same place. Like, you just can't juggle that many plot lines for that long. And, I think that there might have been a little bit of room, like I said, to explore his change of heart and to delve more into Daedra as well. I felt like she kind of got done dirty by the writers in the end. But I wasn't missing a lot from that plot line. I think it needed just a little nudge to give it the closure that it need. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, just in the context of killing characters midway through.
Actually, before we move on, from Daedra and okay, I have more to say about Cyril and Daedra.
So
I can wait. That's fine. I'll leave everyone in suspense, but remind me to talk about it.
I just think the way I see Daedra and Miro is not that they're not evil characters. They're people who don't particularly have the character to resist an unjust situation. They'll kind of just go along with it, but they're not going out of their way to make other people's lives more miserable. They're just
I don't think we need to just have a debate on the nature of evil or the definition of evil, but these are people who say, we are going to have our own people be killed on purpose to serve a political end.
Yeah, but that's evil. That's not Deidre's. That's not her decision. That. And she was angry about that and upset about that.
The shipping trucks that get blown up.
But they didn't kill anybody. They didn't kill any Empire.
I'm with Matt on this.
Yeah.
I think if Daedra Miro in particular doesn't qualify as evil, then we're talking comic book land. And this is one of the things that I like about Andor, and what frustrates me about Hollywood in general is, and I feel like I see the evidence of it in real life around me all the time, is that we're so used to evil being portrayed in such cartoonish extremes that we don't know the real thing when we see it. And the real thing when we see it is that it's wrong and you do nothing about it, that you willfully close your eyes, that you take decisions that will harm hundreds and thousands of people. I mean, that to me, it doesn't get, in real life, it rarely gets more evil than that.
I completely agree. But what I'm saying is that I think because they have such a rigid worldview, and they both think they're doing the right thing. And I think that's the core of they're not there to be evil. They think they're doing the right thing. That is
so did
evil.
Every evil person ever.
100%. And I'm not arguing that she isn't evil at all. But I think exactly what points to her being evil is that she does look at what's going on and she knows exactly what that cartoony evil guy who comes in and orders them to, in the Gorman, when they send the young kids in basically to be bait to die so that they can start this, the fight, the rebellion. She knows exactly, she sees what's going to happen. And she doesn't stop it.
Yeah,
and that's the evil part of her. But I think she thinks, and this is the core of any good villain you have, they think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a spectrum, right? And if you want to define, Daedra as evil, like, I have no problem with that. But there's clearly other people who are worse. Like, Emperor Palpatine is worse than Daedra Miro. And I think, I mean, because I was responding to Matt's point, which was basically like, oh, I feel like the story, was satisfying because I didn't need to see any more of these people. I kind of get them. And I feel like there were depths to these characters that would have been interesting to explore. And I think just to say that they're evil doesn't capture how complicated life is and how we just are born into systems that we didn't set up in the first place. And, there's like different ways that people respond to that. And people who go along with systems are different. There's just like a difference of degree, it seems to me, to people who go along with systems versus people who go out of their way to inflict suffering on other people.
And also you get her bit of backstory in that her parents she called them criminals, and she was raised in a empire, orphanage. And so she was raised, one, she was told to be ashamed of her family. And two, she was raised in this mindset of empire, empire, empire. So yes, they're evil, but also this is how she was raised to think.
That's it.
And who knows if her parents were criminals or rebels,
That's precisely the point I'm making. I agree with you completely, Dave. The point is that for me, these are evil in the real world sense of it. Emperor Palpatine is not real world believable to me. He is a cartoon. He's a delicious cartoon. He's great, but he's not. I promise you, even Hitler thought he was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Absolutely.
It's those worldviews are precisely, we are born into systems. We are all pickled in the brine of our surroundings. And so when we look at situations like those that we have in the real world in front of us right now, the temptation is to imagine that because people aren't twisting mustaches and goose-stepping in the streets, it's not yet, everything's still fine. And I think that complexity, we need more shows that show that complexity, that you can both be evil and be a well-rounded individual with credible motivations and a coherent worldview and complexities. And that's one of the things that this show does well, and that Star Wars has never really attempted to do previously, or at least where it has failed miserably in having these, if it's a spectrum, as you say, everybody's either an A or a Z. And these people are running around in the M's and the N's, and that's really something that I would like to see more of in science fiction.
Well, I don't mean to go off topic, but I'm going to go off topic for 2 seconds. When I told you I said I watched the Acolyte, there was a thing they did in the Acolyte which I was really impressed with. It's mostly about Jedi, but they showed this morally gray area of the Jedi, that they weren't completely 100% good. And I thought that was such an interesting choice, that was one of the reasons why I was like, I wish we could see more of that. The Jedi did some really morally bad things and made morally bad decisions. So that's what I'd like to see more in Star Wars.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go so deep into the philosophical discussion on the nature of evil, which I don't think we're going to be able to resolve in this
but that's
discussion.
The part.
But I mean, the point I was just trying to get to was that I thought there was more to explore with those characters.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
And I just found the scene where Cyril's mother comes to dinner and meets Dedra for the first time. And Dedra says, like, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you. And the mom's like, oh, finally is right. And
that whole dinner made me want to tear the skin off my face. It was so painful.
Second most uncomfortable dinner after Thanksgiving at the Bear. or Christmas or whatever it was.
It was the Feast of the Seven Fishes. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh my God. So painful. But don't you get on Dedra's side when she takes the mother out?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh my God.
You're like, yeah, finally she's putting her ISB training to some good use here. So I just, it again, like it felt truncated to me. Like I just felt like I wanted to see more of those characters' lives and how.
Absolutely.
Because Cyril's whole thing with his
sex life they have.
His mother was kind of left, unresolved or,
Yeah.
But let's see, Matt, but you had something else you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, well, I was talking structurally about the way that characters get offed on this show, and I was thinking about it as this limited series, right? Where they don't really have time to re-up the cast by introducing new people. There are other shows that do this, like 24, Walking Dead does this, where everybody's on a ticking clock. Everybody's going to get killed dramatically on the show. And the way they structure it is over time, they'll layer in new characters and introduce them so that you can get to know them and follow their stories, have them get closure, and then get killed. And it sort of rolls like that. And that's how those shows can run for a long, long time. Andor doesn't re-up the cast. And so you're just watching the cast list dwindle as people get picked off one by one. And it just felt to me like this was an appropriate time for these characters to go, because we know we're headed towards the end and we're going to resolve other plot lines, and then that's going to be the end of the series.
Well, we've never seen these characters in the future, so we know something happens to them.
One of the things that really stood out to me about this season particularly is that it's a tragedy in like the classic structural term. And I don't see a lot of TV that's like that. I think you could argue that The Sopranos is. I think you could argue that Mad Men or Breaking Bad is. But there's not a lot of series that really take on that genre. And
could you say, what do you mean a tragedy in the classical?
Tragedy, the way that Hamlet is a tragedy, or that Oedipus Rex is a tragedy.
The great figure with a tragic flaw, is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that you're looking at this cast of characters, none of them are around in the future. And so you're just waiting. And, you're watching all these characters sell their souls. They're all going to die. What happens in Rogue One. And that's the journey that you're on. It has these moments of hope, which Rogue One also has very deliberately. But I was intrigued by how it lets you sit with these people falling and failing,
What's interesting, too, is that amid all of these unceremonious deaths, we have one character whose death gets an entire episode. And I thought that was a really interesting choice. I didn't disapprove. I have to say, my husband was sitting beside me going, I can't believe they're spending so much time on this. Is this really all we're going to do in this episode? He felt really surprised that given all of these storylines that had been given something resembling short shrift, here we have the storyline, the backstory between Luthen Rael and
Clea.
Thank you, Clea. And Clea in particular finally getting her due through this story. And although it was an unusual choice in the context of how the other characters were treated, I didn't disapprove of it. I thought it was an interesting episode, and I appreciated that backstory. It could have even had more of it, frankly.
Well, I feel like that was just
over time.
Yes. Well, I think that's the base problem with all of this, is that it needed more time, and it had to be condensed. What I felt like that whole one episode, which I also loved, it harkens back to that speech that Luthen gives in first season to Lonnie, where he says, what have I sacrificed? And he goes through that whole thing. I've sacrificed everything. I've sacrificed, my happiness, I've sacrificed love. I've sacrificed all this. And then we finally get the payoff. So it's a payoff to that very memorable speech.
Best scene in the show.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I think it was due to him. Like everybody says, we owe him. We owe the rebellion. He started the rebellion and was finally giving him his due at the same time that everybody else was denigrating him and wanted nothing to do with him, which I think also is something that suffered from the truncation of the entire story, because all of a sudden we come back and everybody's against Luthen and they don't care. And I'm like, wait, why did this happen? And we just get well, he did this and he screwed us over and he sacrificed us. And I'm just like, they didn't really back that up so much for me personally. I wanted to see more of how people turned on Luthen Rael.
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about the flashback, the Freya or Clea flashbacks. Like I felt like I loved the present of that episode where she's infiltrating the hospital and killing Luthen. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. The flashbacks I felt like I didn't like if I had just been told, oh yeah, he was an Imperial sergeant and during a massacre, he rescued this little girl and she's been with him ever since. Like that's, I felt like dramatizing it didn't really tell me anything more than I would have known just from that one sentence synopsis.
Somebody in Disney corporate was like, "You're going to use this de-aging software, or I swear to God, I will cancel this series."
Well, actually,
it was really good. Actually, they really did make him look good.
Saw an interview where Tony Gilroy said, like, basically, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure there was more to it than this, but at least one of his motivations is he didn't want some other writer coming in and like writing the Clea novel and just inventing some whole thing that he wasn't okay with.
I agree with that. That's a good.
I totally understand that. Yeah. I totally understand that. And the funny thing is, to your point, Dave, I actually think we learned more about Clea in that backstory than we learn about Luthen. You see his ruthlessness, but I think you see how his ruthlessness shapes her and turns her into the true believer, ruthless person that she becomes. But again, I really love that he's my favorite character by far, for a bunch of reasons. But the biggest one is that I think he is a really elegant illustration of the reality that, to go back to what we said before, nobody's hands are clean, and it often takes a monster and a ruthless person to start a rebellion that actually works. Mm-hmm. And even some of the most iconic, quote unquote, peaceful rebels of history, if you dig a little deeper into their backstory, it ain't as clean as you thought. I mean, you know, I had speaking of uncomfortable dinner, I'm pretty sure my in-laws don't listen to this show, but uncomfortable dinner episode with my South African in-laws about Nelson Mandela.
Oh, dear.
and the backstory of Nelson Mandela. And, you know, so I think I really liked this idea that some people have to move the needle and everybody else is in the somewhat more luxurious position of sitting around and tutting about their horrible methods, but benefiting from the tarmac they laid to 100%. Get this plane off the ground.
Yeah. And he says that, Cassian says that in that, second to last episode, he says exactly that, to all those people who are like, we can't, when he's saying like we just got this information from him and we need to act on it. And they're like, whoa, well, it's coming from Luthen. And he's like, but this guy just, I know him. I know the good and the bad is what he says. And, he brings that forward. He does address it, which I appreciated.
What did you guys think? Matt,
I was just going to say, I wanted to give a shout out to the actress who plays Clea. I think steals every scene she's in. Really love that she got more to do this season. I was bummed watching her put her hair into these like ear buns. Like, what a great Leia she would be.
She kind of looks like her.
She looks exactly like her.
Yeah,
and
the name is Clea Leia.
It bums me out so much because like Disney's managed to find pretty good Han Solo, a killer Lando, a killer Leia. Just reboot this franchise. Like put new actors into these roles and tell a bunch of classic trilogy stories. Like it seems like a no-brainer. I wouldn't even care if they just used her. Yeah, she looks like this girl from Coruscant, whatever.
No, she was great. And you know what else that
I just want to highlight the scene where she is trying to remove the listening device from the art gallery. That was just one of the tensest scenes.
Oh my God.
Remember?
So tense. Yeah, he does tense, and he does that so well. Almost like oh God, what's his name? Kill Bill. What's his
Tarantino.
name? Tarantino. He does suspense almost as well as Tarantino.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say was that relationship between Clea and Luthen is kind of like The Professional, the movie. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where a killer trains a little girl to be an assassin. Anybody seen that movie?
Yeah.
No, I agree.
I'm trying to decide
very
if
lone
I have.
wolf and cub, right? And there's elements of that in Mandalorian as well. It's a classic samurai trope, which is all over Star Wars, right?
Yes.
So I love seeing those echoes over and over again, just like this one as an example.
Yeah.
What did you guys make of the scene where Dedra Meero confronts Luthen in his art gallery? Because I thought it was a great dramatic scene, but I was wondering why she would have done something so dumb.
It's a great dramatic scene, and they had to make her a lot dumber than she is to have it happen.
But then also why he doesn't just blow up the whole place. the moment the doorbell
Why doesn't he just
rings.
stab her with the knife?
Yeah.
Like
That was the biggest. I had an impossible time with it after all of their years, decades of planning, and everything is so meticulous, and they've got the burn protocol ready, and his out isn't an elegant cyanide pill under his tooth. No, it's the rando antique dagger, which doesn't get the job done.
Yeah.
I found that very difficult to believe. So yes Dave, as bad as her plan was, and unbelievably bad, his plan was pull me right out of the story incredibly bad.
Yes. Because he knew he was going to die.
100%.
That's why he went back.
He should have had that cyanide pill under every time he put the wig on, the pill goes under the tooth.
Absolutely 100%. Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like they wanted that conversation for dramatic purposes. And I can imagine some weird personal reason he might have for wanting to kill himself in this specific way. It wasn't justified in the episode, but I guess it could have been. But yeah,
you really think he would leave that much to chance? What a messy way to off yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's an artist, Erin. Cyanide pill, so cliche,
so pedestrian. No soul.
she really doesn't learn her lesson either. I feel like there are moments throughout the show where her grandstanding gets her in trouble, and she just makes the same mistake over and over again.
But then again, people do make the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah,
that's her tragic
Ask me how I know.
But I feel like it was a moment. I wanted to see the moment where she makes the decision, where she decides, no, I'm not going to obey protocol. I'm going to do this really stupid, reckless thing for style points.
You know what? I agree with that, because it wasn't until after that I realized that she had taken this on herself and had over that her former aide guy who got this assignment after she was taken off of it.
Yeah.
And had the worst death. Speaking of unceremonious deaths, that we've had this guy literally since episode 1 or episode 2 of the show. And I didn't even realize he was dead until he was really dead.
Yeah. That was great.
He used literally as a human shield.
Every time a K2 unit flings someone to death, take a drink. That's
Well, did it seem like the K2 units in this were more like the Terminator than in other in Rogue One, for example? I mean, I just rewatched the beginning of Rogue One, and
I sat and watched the whole thing.
Jyn Erso kills one with one shot.
There's in the Jedi Survivor series of games, they are prominent kind of elite enemy, and they're pretty tough to kill without a lightsaber. Yeah.
Yeah, and she shoots one right in the chest and then it drops, which was weird when I watched it. This is in Rogue One, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It just one shot from a blaster and it's down, and that was a little odd.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah,
we are such nitpickers.
Yeah, I know, this is really
such nitpickers.
Oh, actually, I'll pivot there to some interesting trivia. So, one of the ways that the budget affected this was that they had originally written. So they had a more elaborate storyline for how Cassian meets K2SO. And it involved, so there's a Imperial transport that crashed on Yavin, and then they're inside it, and they're kind of being hunted by this K2 unit in a kind of a horror movie sort of thing. And then they just had to scrap that whole thing for budgetary reasons.
Yeah, it did feel like in Rogue One, the relationship between the two of them is longer than a year old. So that was one thing that felt like maybe they got to that plot line too late.
Well, I guess a lot of people were complaining in season 1 of Andor that K2SO hadn't shown up yet, and Tony Gilroy basically said we couldn't afford to have the robot in the show that much. It's apparently super expensive to do that robot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'd like to know how they got in 830 games of poker or whatever
in a year.
Didn't he say it was something like that in a year while also being badass rebels? Yeah. I have questions about how
it's a military thing to hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of downtime for, rebels, I think, I don't know.
One thing I want to bring up and this is specifically because I watched Rogue One right after I finished season 2. One of the things that really elevates this, as a Star Wars show is the use of music. because it was incredibly jarring going from Andor, and it's very deliberate and subtle use of music that's not specifically Star Wars music, to Rogue One, where they exclusively use Star Wars movie music for everything. And it just highlighted exactly how much music is part of storytelling. And they use it so well in Andor. And I really wish Star Wars shows would go forward with that, because the minute you use that Star Wars music, it makes it like a fun adventure show. And watching Rogue One again in that context really brought it down for me in my estimation, even though it's still the best Star Wars movie and it has the best ending.
Two reactions to that. One, I had the same kind of overall reaction watching I also did a rewatch of Rogue One after I'd watched season 1 of Andor, and came away thinking that, Rogue One suffers a little for watching it side by side with Andor, because you realize how much they've upped their game.
Yes, 100%.
But then two, you're absolutely right about the music. And one of the things that stuck out to me as a small little detail, but just one that felt the galaxy feel really lived in, was, for some reason, I guess it's because I had just watched it, there's that sequence in season 1 where Andor is hiding on the resort, beach resort. And as he's walking through all these clubs where people are getting drunk, they're playing this like dance tune. And then you fast forward to Mon Mothma's daughter's wedding, and it's all the very formal music. And then at some point, the DJ comes on, as happens in every wedding, and they drop this club tune, and everybody gets really excited and starts jumping up and down. It's the same club tune.
Oh, is it?
Andor was. I'm pretty sure it is. That Andor was listening to on the beach, and I love that little detail of, like, this is the Galaxy Top 40 hits that's going around right now.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes, I love the disco bot.
Yeah, it was a
DJ is the disco ball.
It was a hopping tune for sure. I want to ask Erin also. I mean, another one of my favorite sequences in this was the exfiltration from the Senate that they do for Mon Mothma.
Great.
And since Erin, with all your government and diplomatic experience and stuff, I was just wondering how that sequence played for you.
If that resonates with the times I've been exfiltrated from the UN General Assembly. Yeah, it definitely does. No, I really liked it. Actually, I don't know. I get hung up on architecture for some reason, but I found myself wondering for a lot of the scenes, where is this? Is this all a soundstage? How much of it is green screen? How much of it is an actual location that they scouted? For example, the building, the gross safe house apartment building that they live in. Everything in the Star Wars universe, especially on Coruscant, is so austere and grim. But anyway, the Senate chamber, as uninspired as I have always found ever since the Padme days of as uninspired as the interior of the Senate chamber is for me, I found those outer wings they did actually really remind me of the inside of the UN. And I really liked that scene. I was kind of confused what was happening with the driver at the end there, because it almost seemed like he cared what was happening, beyond his sort of role as a double agent for the ISB or an ISB plant. But yeah, I thought it was a great scene.
So I think the driver to me feels like one of these elements of tragedy that I'm talking about. Like, this is a guy who gets called an idiot by both his boss and his secret boss. Clearly is on the payroll, but then, I mean, seemingly has a change of heart and goes to help Mon however he can. But of course, it's in Andor's way.
It wasn't just me. He did seem to have a change of heart.
I did get that impression.
It's brutal. Yeah. Like, this is a guy who's but again, it's like the message is, rebels can't get out of each other's way. And it causes problems. And this is an example of that.
But also, you can't take the time to figure that out. Like, he's trying to get her out. Like, you can't take time to ask him what his motivations are. So you have to make that snap decision. And when your priority is getting her out of there, you'd shoot him.
Yeah.
I'm going to...
Go
ahead.
I was going to change the subject. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of the things I really liked about the consistency of Cassian Andor's character is that in both Andor, the show, and in Rogue One, we meet him doing something stone cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's just right from the beginning. He's like, if he has a choice between dropping you and not, he's going to drop you.
Yeah.
Right. There's no time. Luthen does
this
that
Han
too. Han
always shoots first.
A reason they get along.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's Han shoots first.
I guess one point I want to make just about the Senate scene is that, it's this incredibly tense scene and like one shot is fired. Like Cassian shoots the driver.
2 shots. Yeah.
2 shots. Yeah.
Does he shoot him twice?
Oh my God, you got
he shoots the
he shoots the other
ISB
woman.
agent. The ISB agent.
Okay.
I will say one thing about that. This is my actually moment. Alderaanian security should not have guns because Alderaan has no weapons.
Oh.
But I just contrasting that to the plethora of shooting in a lot of other Star Wars scenes where it doesn't have anywhere near as much emotional impact. This sort of less is more approach that Andor takes. And I actually hadn't thought about it until some review or something I looked at mentioned it, but there's like literally no space battle in season 2 of Andor at all, which you think of as being such a staple of.
Well, there's a terrestrial space battle, right? The experimental TIE fights the other TIEs.
And the fight in the hallway to get into when they're coming for them in the apartment where Clea and...
No, I'm saying space like
space.
outer
space. No, I know.
Like in space.
Yes. No.
Okay, I guess you're right. There's the thing at the very beginning that's
but
through
for
the
rest
canyon.
Of the season.
But there's no outer
then
space.
He in episode 3 he strafes the stormtroopers and the TIE. But but you're right. It's
that's not
like
outer.
Not like Luthen's fight in season 1.
Do I have to explain what outer space? It's black and there's stars and you're like above the atmosphere. That's outer space.
There's no people in space. That's the problem. It's the planets are where the people are. Space doesn't vote, Dave.
No lightsabers
and no lightsabers.
Yeah. Very few and judicious references to the Force, which I appreciate.
Well, here's the question. I was a little like when they brought the Force healer thing.
The Force healer.
I was a little like,
I was hate kind of the concept.
Yeah. And what was her? He's a messenger. Is that a reference to him getting or being part of getting the plans out?
Yeah. She sees the future and it helps Bix realize that she needs to go. Yeah. I'm glad she didn't kill herself like Star is Born style. It felt like that was where they were headed with that. But
oh my God, you just ruined A Star is Born for me.
I hate to tell you this. It's like a 70-year-old movie.
Wait, what was I going to say? The Force healer
storyline.
The Force healer. I wasn't crazy about that. They hadn't mentioned the Force up till now in Andor. I think they could have left it out. I mean, like it does. Like once I saw that Bix is going to make this big decision to leave, it like helps justify that because she knows he has this destiny or whatever. But I think,
it also felt like fan service.
I would have been just as happy just to have those 2 scenes deleted.
So I hope we can move on to the Bix storyline because I have thoughts. But
we have 17 minutes left.
I agree with you. About the nature of the Force scene. I think it was necessary to mention the Force at least in passing a couple of times because we're meant to believe by the time that we get to the original Star Wars trilogy that this is a religion that everybody knows about, even if people largely don't believe it anymore. And so in order for that to land, it can't, come out of nowhere. This is the first time we've ever heard of it. People have to at least mention the existence of it and there have to be some holdouts who believe in it. So I think it had to be in there some way. I agree with you. Force healing would not have been my first choice.
Yeah.
I just think Andor has this particular aesthetic that is not 100% consistent with the Star Wars universe, where like the aliens are basically in the background and or only ever in the background, and the Force is not mentioned. And like I'm fine with that, even if it doesn't totally jibe with everything we know going into this about the Star Wars universe.
I also had a little bit of a problem when I was thinking about these things and the Force thing. Like I was trying to put all the stories in context in, what came when, what happened when. And I'm trying to remember, like, I guess it's been 20 years since the Jedi were eradicated at this point?
Yeah.
Does anybody get just a general timeline of when?
Yeah, it's been 18 years, right? That's
I guess.
And kind of silly that people are ignorant of of Jedi ever,
Exactly.
given that anyone walking around Coruscant can see that giant building. It's like, I know that the Dwayne Reed that used to be a bank, it hasn't been that long.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. It hasn't been that long, and this was just such a linchpin of the world.
Yeah.
It's not like it's been a 1,000 years. And anyway, so I feel like
that hasn't made sense ever in Star Wars. It's not a
I mean that it's true. But the aliens might be in the background in Rogue One and in Andor, but they're there. And similarly, I think it makes sense for the Force to very much be in the background and in the deep background, but it still has to be there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I really appreciated that it wasn't mentioned at all in season 1. I thought that was a refreshing thing. And I think we discussed that when we discussed season 1 about how Jedi and the Force was never mentioned at all.
Yeah.
But I see the point of, yes, you should probably bring it in at this point since we're about to get a new Jedi.
But so, Erin, you want to talk about the big storyline with the caveat that we have like 14 minutes and then we have a hard out?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't love this storyline. It felt like one that probably had more legs when they had a longer runtime and they had more episodes. I thought Bix basically spent the entire season in the fridge. And they could have done more with her. I really didn't like the scene at the very end with the baby. It felt super cliche to me. It felt like a sort of a sop to, in case you're too sad that that Cassian is going off to die. It also felt like the morality of her decision is then thrown into a very different light, which you could argue about. When she says, "I'm deciding for both of us," who does she mean? Looking back on it, who are the both of us? In the moment, you think she's referring to herself and Cassian, but maybe she's referring to herself and the kid. I don't know if it's just my own kind of allergy to, I think in most circumstances, the father has a right to know, not to get into too far into that territory, but I just didn't love that choice.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Dave. I'll follow up.
I wasn't like the whole Bix, Brasso, Willman, Saw Gerrera was definitely my least favorite of these. I would have just cut those and had more Deidre and Cyril if it were up to me. I think it just felt like they were stuck with those characters from season 1 and kind of had to find something to happen to them, but none of it felt all
Even
that.
Willman? I feel like Willman could have disappeared into the grass and nobody would have noticed.
I didn't even remember. I didn't even remember him, honestly.
He threw the pipe bomb.
Yeah.
He was the son of the
guy who was killed when they discovered
protecting Bix.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't appeared
like
in
he could have
season 2,
disappeared.
I wouldn't have noticed at all.
Yeah.
No, and that's my point. I think it was a curious choice to include him as prominently, especially because he's pretty annoying. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Brasso was a big deal and Bix was a big deal in season 1. And so I see why they felt the need to carry them over, but they got rid of Brasso pretty quickly. And then Bix kind of hangs around, but they don't give her a really good reason to hang around. And then the baby thing just irritated me.
Okay. Can I?
Yeah, Andrea.
Because I did spend a bit of time this morning thinking about that. Well, first of all, I want to point out I liked the depiction of PTSD. I liked that the misdirect of everything she's seeing about the doctor is a PTSD trauma dream. And then when she gets her revenge, you kind of at first think it's a dream and then, oh no, it's real. And I loved that. The final scene of her standing in the wheat field with the baby, through the whole thing, when she left, I'm like, oh God, she's pregnant. Oh God, there's going to be a baby. And I'm like, please don't do the cliche thing. Please don't do it. And then they did it. But here's the thing. By that point, I actually think it worked. Hear me out. So it felt like it was the culmination of the entire theme of the show, which is rebellion is about hope. And what better example of hope, what better embodiment of hope than new life? So I think in this context, I think the cliche ending actually did work and I wasn't offended by it. I saw it coming, but I was not offended by it. I didn't go, oh, that's, God damn it, you ruined everything. It actually worked because it was the embodiment, the silent, quiet embodiment of the entire theme, which is hope. And what is hope but new life? There. I said my piece.
Okay. I mean, I can see where you're coming from with that.
I sense a agree to disagree.
Yeah, that's fair. No, that's totally fair. That's totally.
I see where you're coming from, and I am the first person to say that tropes and cliches, when they are strategically deployed, can be highly effective.
Yes.
And they're not a bad thing in and of themselves. So I agree with that. I'm not sure I bought it in this sense, and I think it probably would have sat better if I were more comfortable with the Bix storyline in general. And I think there was this moment that you reminded me of that I actually really liked, where she has the first set of flashbacks when she's going through her trauma of the doctor, and she sees Cassian being stone cold and killing a guy that she thinks doesn't need to be killed. I would have loved for them to explore that more and for that to become a source of tension in the relationship, where she sees Cassian becoming the thing he hates, where she sees him becoming the thing that did something awful to her. And you get a flash of that and then it goes away. And I would have loved to dig deeper on that. Maybe I'm just sadistic that way, but
no, I like that. That sounds good.
I think it's really aligned to the exploration that Luthen's having of basically saying, I am sacrificing not only my life, who cares about my life? I'm sacrificing my soul and everything I believe to be true for a future I will never see, for a dawn I will never get to experience. And I think having Bix go through a similar reflection where she sees this Cassian as he rises through the ranks of the rebellion and becomes a respected rebel, what he sacrifices to get there and how he comes to resemble the thing that traumatized her. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. And I think all of these problems are because they truncated the whole story into one season. I think
to bring us all the way back to where we started.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, no question.
All of our nitpicks are really coming down to this same root problem.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah, so we're all out of time, so we're going to have to truncate this panel.
We're doing the thing the show did. You stole my joke, Dave.
If only. Oh, sorry, Matt. Sorry. But we have a couple minutes for final thoughts if they're very quick. So, Matt, any quick final thoughts on season 2 of Andor?
I mean, I think it's very telling that everyone's complaints is that there's not more of this show. It's a great show and special. Incredible cast, incredible writing. Really excited to see what all these folks do next. And I'm available if they're interested.
Andrea, final thoughts?
I am sorry to say goodbye to one of the best shows on TV. I wish they had 5 seasons to explore all of these issues because they were all fantastic issues and very timely. And again, the cast is great. The writing's great. 2 wonderful things I never brought up while we were talking was when Cyril dies, right before Cyril dies, and Cassian says, "Who are you?" I just want to point out exactly how human that is, in that we are all the bad guy in somebody else's story and we don't even know it. And I'd love to seeing that brought forward because it's just so universal. And I also loved the scene in the art gallery when the tense scene where Clea's, with trying to get rid of the listening device. There's a pan. This is totally me, little thing. There's a pan across all the art installation, and there's right in the center is a Roman dodecahedron, which is an actual real thing that nobody knows what was used for in the Roman Empire. And I had to pause to laugh my ass off at that. Anyway, I just wanted to get that in there. Anyway, yes, goodbye to one of the best TV shows I've seen in very, very, very long time.
And Erin, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just endorse and retweet everything that was just said by the previous 2 speakers. I really just am sorry to see it go. I think it was wonderful. I would love to see Tony Gilroy spend more time in sci-fi and spend more time in speculative fiction and give us more stories that have real world resonance through high adventure. And particularly because he brings such a richly studied historical perspective. And if this show inspires just a few people who wouldn't ordinarily have done so to dig deep into, to pick up a couple of books on Stalin, on the Viet Cong, on the rebellion of your choice, and really read about them and just pick up all those little Easter eggs that you wouldn't otherwise notice, and also then pause, put your book down, and take a look around. I think then it will have not only been an incredibly entertaining show, but possibly an important one as well.
Can I add one last thing to that? We never talked about Monmouth's speech in the Senate, and I think everybody should read that speech because I think it was incredibly timely, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish that we'd had more time to just underscore the level of craft that went into this show, because like Andrea was saying with the music, I mean, just the level, just looking at it, hearing it, the dialogue, the music, like the set design, the lighting, just everything, it just is at a level of craft that is just unusual in science fiction television for sure. And it's really the work of master craftsmen. I'm sorry there's not more of it. I was thinking that this is like going to like a really fancy French restaurant and they bring out this plate and there's just like one little thing right in the middle and it's really, tastes amazing, but you might still be hungry afterwards. That's kind of what this show is like. It's like, it's exquisite and I wish the portions were bigger. Yeah.
That's not where I thought you were going with the analogy. I thought you were going to say they brought out a burger and you were like, really? This is a burger at a fancy French restaurant? And then you ate it and you were like, oh my God, this burger. This is a Star Wars show, but this is the best, most delicious, juicy Star Wars show ever.
Well, that was my review of season 1. My review of season 2 is a little bit different. But yeah,
there's a Parmesan tweel on this Star Wars show.
And some bacon foam.
Yeah.
Gotta have some foam.
All right, but we're all out of time, so we're going to wrap things up there. So again, we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Erin Lindsey, and Matt London. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Erin Lindsey, Andrea Kail, and Matt London for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.